Gooning is defined as the euphoric, trance-like state achieved through prolonged self-pleasuring, and has become a catch-all term for the chronically weird reprobates who devote much of their time and energy in service of said gooning. This is not a new phenomena, so allow me, Wolf, to take you on a mystical journey of humanity's most basic need. But maybe, subscribe first. I'd really appreciate it, and it would go a long way to appeasing the wolf gods. Gooning was first invented in the Garden of Eden when Eve wasn't in the mood. I was actually there in the garden when things went tits up. The apple of knowledge wasn't actually the first strike the couple received. You wouldn't believe what Adam was doing to the watermelons of gratitude. Prehistory, of which we can learn about through archaeology, shows us that gooning was first limited by the artistic talents of the caveman. Taking time to realise that stick figures aren't the best way to convey big booty Latinas. Sculpting, however, made great leaps into depictions of large round women, which were the beauty standard of the time. I feel a caveman watching My 600-Pound Life would nut immediately if he saw one of them being lifted out of bed on a winch. Gooning, unfortunately, took a hard hit in the early years of civilization, as topless women were normal, and thus they lost their appeal. That's not to say that gooners were not prevalent. See the case of an Athenian lady, who argued, successfully may I add, that how could she be guilty of a crime if the gods gave her such perfect tits? Laugh all you want, but goonery is still prevalent in excusing crimes and poor behaviour. See the girls simping for the Boston bomber as they concluded that no one that cute could be a terrorist, something I've relied on for years. See the Siege of Troy, a semi-mythological war that was the result of a guy, quote-unquote, kidnapping Helen of Troy, who was said to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Considering people in history look like this, and I'd have a pretty solid shout at being Wolf the Gorgeous in the past. Paris, also said to be the most handsome man in the world, eloped with her, and then thousands upon thousands of people were killed in battle, and a city sacked because the little goblin couldn't keep his hands to himself. If I was a citizen of Troy, I'd have cast her over the wall myself, as I value my life, family, and my worldly possessions a little bit more than how hard my prince can nut. The same goes for Cleopatra, possibly the most gooned-over person in history. Not only was she married to her own younger brother, but she also pushed an entire empire to collapse through a love triangle that would eventually cost her her life. Be hard-pressed to tell a legionary on the front lines of Gaul, fighting off another attack by naked, frenzied tribal warriors high on mushrooms by night, that, food wasn't going to be arriving as a civil war had kicked off at home. That doesn't sound good, they say. Oh well, someone involved is getting pretty good, albeit incestuous pussy, so how could I blame them? One side note, Cleopatra had possibly the greatest gal pals in history. After Mark Antony was defeated and the Roman Civil War victor had claimed and captured her in Egypt, she was kept as a prisoner. She was galactically fucked. They would even celebrate geese for warning the people of an attack on Rome, and then on each anniversary they would carry them round on little lovely litters with delicious treats to snack on. The dogs, however, who did not bark that one time when they were supposed to, would, for in the same way, each anniversary be crucified and lined for miles on the way to Rome. The Romans considered themselves the most cultured people in the world, and so it goes that a Roman commander who was born a Gaul chieftain's son and kept as a hostage was raised to command to fight for Rome. He then went on a visit to Rome, saw the dogs all crucified, and was like, what the fuck? He would later betray Rome and give them one of their biggest defeats in history, depicted here. For a naked, drug-crazed, human sacrifice-committing barbarian whose people cut the hearts out of people to give to the gods, to say, nah, this is way out of line, lads, is quite funny. Cleopatra was going to be taken to Rome and punished by these people. Her gal pal staged what's believed to be the greatest friend move in history by distracting the guards. I assume, like this. And allowed another to slip through with a snake hidden in a bowl of apples. She got through, got it to bite Cleopatra and then themselves, denying the Romans the ability to do God knows what to her. Anyway, gooning. As people say, all roads lead to Rome. They can also say all art leads to hentai, which is a fact, and I will not hear any critiques. The Dark Ages were not called the Dark Ages for the regression of technology, culture, and society, but were in fact named as such after a steep decline in gooning levels, adopting lame things like modesty and being a good Christian woman, and spurring dope things like smuggling snakes in bowls. Much like a Chinese cultivation practitioner, gooning needed to regress to achieve greater heights. During the Dark Ages, the sultry neck and shoulder flash was the height of sexiness. It took time and the growth of people with fun feathery hats of the Renaissance for gooning to come back on force. Painting naked goddesses was back in fashion, baby, but clearly they'd been on Ozempic for a few thousand years and were no longer made of pottery. This was now seen as the height of sophistication, despite promiscuity still being frowned upon, lest you don a weird mask and drink wine at a party. It doesn't really make sense. This era was also progressive for naked men in art. Whether it be through sculptures or fine art, the lads could now expose their little knobs and such for the lasses and lads, the statue of David being the primary conduit of female wank banks for generations to come. Here's a fun sculpture story, said no one ever. In Liege in 1852, a statue of Lucifer, the fallen angel, was commissioned for the church, and immediately drew criticism, as the women of the service were too busy gooning over him to pay attention to the service. This, I must stress, is like unleashing a pot of honey into a field of starving bears. They'd never seen a twink like it. Rather than pull down the statue, as they'd already paid a fortune for it, instead, the church decided that the only way to defeat gooning was with the power of greater gooning, and commissioned a second statue to replace it, done by the artist's brother, which was also criticised as being too sexy again, but in a bad boy way. Even in China, you had the idea of court eunuchs, the emperor deciding that simply executing anyone who fools around with his many concubines was simply not enough, so also decided to cut their nuts off. It turned out that preventing gooning made more time for other things like political intrigue. Chinese history is, of course, as ever, written by the victor, so who knows what's true. However, they do still demonise eunuchs as being these strange and corrupted individuals whose motivations are difficult to understand for the ordinary layman. Gooning, therefore, we can conclude, is the single unifying trait of all of mankind. We look at videos of birds making elaborate nests and displays of prowess, and think, nice. We also see pigeons in their pathetic attempt at nests, and also go, nice. The modern era was a wild time for gooning. You see, before the concepts of mass media, you had to travel to Florence and look at a ceiling to crack one out. Then you take news of what you saw to your local village and describe it in painstaking detail to help the others with their attempts. With printing in newspapers, gooning went worldwide. Even during the World War, planes were not free from gooners. They would paint pin-up girls on fuselages, like a Luftwaffe pilot would hesitate to pull the trigger and put bullet holes in her shapely arse. Marilyn Monroe is widely accredited as the progenitor of goon fodder, being openly desirable and promiscuous, like, "Hey boys," was something the firmly repressed people of the modern world couldn't handle. The fact that her standing over a fan is so iconic paints a grim picture of what was around before. The sexiest thing before that was hoping a lady would trip over and you get a minor glance at her bloomers. In the new world of movie stars and celebrities, people were now exposed to actually attractive people and not what you'd settle for in a bar in Grimsby. In fact, the economy of normal-looking people was shattered by what we see on the internet. TikTok, for example, if you look at content designed for teens, is almost exclusively made up of attractive people doing shitty thirst traps, doing things poorly, or maybe, if you're lucky, kind of well. These types of people were described as legend in the olden days, murdered and drained of their blood to provide youthful vigour to local lords. The same goes for exposure to celebrities and influencers. God, I hate that word. More on that later. As society entered the peace and love of the 60s, and sundresses and giant daffodils were the main attire, you'd think people would get happier with a net increase in goon material. Sadly, goonery does not reflect a peaceful society. You have generations of people denying hippies were hot and entering a spiral of conservative attitudes to attire and activity that persists to this day. By the time we reached the modern era, celebrities became the main goon material, as well as adult services becoming widespread, particularly with the creation of Playboy, Cult, and other printed materials. This was a sad time for trees. rather than going out heroically and returning to your ancestors via great pyre or wood furnace. You were ritually humiliated, turned into paper, and repeatedly nut on by horny people. It's a shameful end. Side note, but I never understood why these magazines have text. The audacity that they believe people will read the articles is quite funny. You could publish the chemical formula of a nerve agent and you'll never see a single victim. We kind of had something similar, weird and a lot more honest in Britain. We used to have the concept of page-free models. I remember seeing a paper when I was younger, the title saying 4 British soldiers killed in an IED attack in Afghanistan. I opened the front cover to read, and then just saw some tits. This was normal for a very long time. I saw it as the psyop that it was, intended to pacify the masses. You could have a headline saying that you have to run to your nearest nuclear bomb shelter and people would still turn the page and go, tits! The best part was that in the very corner it would introduce the girl with a name, age and their thoughts on a current event, which I'm fairly sure was a legal loophole to keep it as political commentary. It would say Jess, 22, believes that the recent market activity creates a poor precedent for investment in Africa. These were obviously all kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I thought it was funny to imagine that the page-free girls were the best political and societal analysts, but were unfortunately kept to 8 words a day and naked. Once the internet came to its true form, which, let's be real, is a giant shit-filled dumpster, adult content and therefore goon material became surplus. This, you'd think, would increase the net goon amount, but you'd be incorrect. As with my analysis so far, you notice that this happened in ancient times too, with the whole chest covering thing. Scarcity, or restrictions, make gooning more potent. This was proven by the current era of OnlyFans. I frankly don't understand it. Perhaps I'm too fiscally responsible to give money for feet pictures, when I could easily find them for free online or just become a cobbler. However, the artificial, special and rare feet hidden behind a paywall seems to affect people at a base part in the brain. Think the whole bathwater fiasco. It admittedly the smartest money-making scheme since taxes. Belle Delphine, which sounds like a yoghurt brand you'd buy in Lidl, decided to sell genuine gamer girl bathwater. You're not going to believe this, but weirdos bought it in droves. I've considered my own scheme for selling my malted fur to act as wigs for bald men, or alternatively, pubes. In fact, have you noticed about who is considered the hottest people in the world, and how they were almost never models? Isn't that weird? Humans, through my study at the Wolf Academy of Science, which is the opposite corner of the cave that I piss in, it's talent that is the most desirable trait in humans. Doing things well activates a part of the brain I diagnose as the Ooga Booga zone. It doesn't really matter what it is. It could be skill with thimbles or baton twirling, because not only can you win every tiebreaker with someone comparatively good looking, but also fire way above your weight. I was once good at sports once, believe it or not, and I had to retire from injury, and I realised firsthand that no one wanted to talk to me anymore. You could easily say that adult actors are more attractive than the best actors in the world, but who's considered hotter? The actors, of course. Same with sports people. They can be mildly cretinous and still be seen as very handsome. Influencers, I don't think, get enough hate. Call me crazy and give me a terms of service violations, but I stand by that statement and I will never retract it. Fucking try me. What is an influencer anyway? What are they influencing? Being a bellend? Probably. If I were to forcibly diagnose myself as an influencer, then it would be influencing people to bitterness levels they only previously dreamed of. Influencers are never ugly. You ever noticed that? Here's another statement from me that could be well in the running for Quote of the Year consideration. Attractive people are influencers. Ugly people are activists. Tell me I'm wrong. I say ugly, but it's really not being conventionally attractive. Gooning is then weaponised in this influencing, achieving levels of cringe never seen in history. This would kill a medieval peasant. Unfortunately, gooning has a dark side, and that's the self-perception of being gooned upon, which admittedly sounds like if the Joker's henchmen beat you up. The process of worrying about how good you look has been the primary downfall of man besides war, plague and calories. Everything we do is in service to looking good or trying to appeal to the people we find attractive. Money, fame, notoriety, all in service to the goon. I'm not free of this myself. As the sexiest Wolf Award winner for 4,000 years until hell of a boss fans brigaded for their one to win. I don't really have an answer to the issue of gooning. Hell, it's even being used to promote fun things like products, sport teams and genocide. Being partly an anime tuber, whatever that means, it's worth mentioning that anime is the absolute pinnacle of goonery. That scarcity and societal conservative attitudes I mentioned, well, it turns out that pictures of fat lasses in caves continued to develop, and a whole art form became dedicated to goonery. Hentai basically became such a force of degeneracy that it leaked into all aspects of existence. Ahego, incest, alien octopi, it's all Japan's fault. They make entire animes with attempts at plot and stuff. Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World, for example, that I covered on this channel, made me so angry with its plot, I completely crashed out on the production staff, and now they haven't been seen since. What a fun little trip through the history of mankind. If you enjoyed my rambling, then like, comment, and describe how much of a gooner you are. Oh, and subscribe too, I guess. I kind of need that. Bye.